Hello everyone. So today I want to talk about the top 5 things I like about living in Japan. As I am now in my 7th year of living in Japan, I wanted to share the top 5 things I like about living here. These are the things that make me want to continue living here for the foreseeable future. Okay, so number 1 is safety. As you probably know, Japan is a very safe country. Yes, there are earthquakes and typhoons and other natural disasters that occur reasonably regularly, but in terms of day-to-day life, it is actually quite safe. While Japan has quite a low crime rate, crime obviously does happen. However, Japan has a lot less petty crimes like, say, pickpocketing, theft, and burglary, etc. For example, it's a really good feeling to be able to walk into a cafe and put your phone down on a table and then go and order, come back, and know that your phone will still be there when you get back. I would never do that in most other countries. Your phone would be gone. I also never worry about where I park my car in terms of having it broken into. I'm sure that it does happen, but from the people I've spoken to and the local crime reports that I've read, it just doesn't seem to be a common thing. I never feel like an area is too sketchy to walk around at night here in Japan. I also don't worry about taking the last train home either because I know it's still fairly safe. It's a great feeling not having to think about how to protect myself or my things when I go out somewhere. It allows you to enjoy things a lot more, and I really like that. Okay, so next we have number 2, and that's the transport. Well, this one's pretty obvious. I'm sure it appears in most foreigners who live in Japan's best of Japan lists, and there is a reason for it. It's actually really great. Now, there are exceptions, of course. If you do live out in the middle of nowhere, then your transport options will obviously be limited. But if you live in any reasonably sized city, you shouldn't have much issues getting around. Trains here are usually on time, so you can plan your connections quite well. Usually, like 1 or 2 minutes change, you can actually make the train. They're also quite clean, which is fantastic. There's nothing more annoying than getting on a train with graffiti everywhere and trash on the ground. Buses are also quite common as well, often connecting with rail services like trains. They're also quite clean and run on time, with the exception that they are subject to traffic conditions, of course. So sometimes they can run a little bit late, but usually on time. And buses aren't that expensive either. I would say the train and bus system here in Japan are the best, or close to the best, in the world. The other thing about transport that I like here in Japan that not many people mention is the roads are really high quality. They are generally looked after pretty well, so they're quite smooth and potholes aren't really very common. Owning a car in Japan is quite expensive. However, it's still worth having a car because they're so good here. The expressway network here is amazing. Service areas along the expressway are really nice to visit, which can make the journey quite fun, as each one usually has some different local food available, and the toilets there are always really clean. Even with the few downsides, driving here is really nice experience, as drivers tend to be not really aggressive like in some countries. Having a car can really improve your life in Japan, as you can do things like go for some really interesting drives to places where there isn't a lot of public transport. That can be, up in the mountains or something like that. So yeah, definitely, I recommend having a car in Japan. So that brings me to my next item in the list, and that's the number 3, the countryside. When many people think of Japan, they think Japan is a major metropolis like Tokyo. Well, that's not true for all of Japan. While Tokyo, Osaka, Nagoya, etc. are all major cities, once you get out of the big cities, Japan has some really beautiful scenery. Japan is quite mountainous, so there are lots of roads you can drive up into the mountains with some very scenic views. There are often small towns you can visit in the mountains too, which allows you to see how people live outside of the big cities in Japan. There's also some lovely hot springs you can go and visit in the mountains. Japan is also famous for having some of the best ski fields, so those mountains become very popular tourist destinations in the winter months. There are lots of countryside areas with sprawling rice fields, which smell amazing in the summer. Go for a walk near the rice fields in the summer, it's really beautiful. As well as having some nice rivers where you can do fishing or hike near them, etc. Japan has many nice campgrounds that are really well set up with nice showers and, once again, clean toilets, so you can really enjoy being out in nature. One more thing that I'd like to add is that people in the countryside tend to be a lot friendlier as well. It can be a welcome change from being in a place like, say, Tokyo. Okay, so now to the 4th item on the list, and that is food and drink. So Japan has amazing food. Oh yeah, that's a pretty well known fact. I'm sure many of you know foods like sushi, ramen, tempura, and those sorts of things. Japan actually has a whole lot more than what you usually see in a typical Japanese restaurant outside of Japan. Plus, the quality seems to be so much better, and it really isn't expensive. I've found Japanese food can be really expensive outside of Japan. It can be expensive here too, but overall you can find really good food for quite reasonable prices here. In fact, having access to such delicious food has meant that I've put on a bit of weight since living here, but I can tell you it's worth it because the food here is just that good. Okay, as for alcohol, alcohol is not very expensive here in Japan either, especially compared to back home. A beer in a restaurant or pub generally is around $5 or $6. Same with most mixed drinks. The one big thing they have here is all you can drink. Now, you can usually pay around $20 and you can get all you can drink for say 1.5 to 2 hours, depending on the place. Sometimes the prices are different depending on the quality of the drinks, but usually for around $20 at most of the chain pub places. Most foreigners who come here can't believe that such a system exists, and I know because I was one of them when I came here. I love it and I've taken advantage of it many times and will continue to do so in the future. Okay, when it comes to food and drink from the supermarket, that's actually covered in the last item on the list, which is number 5, so cost of living. If you come from a place that has a high cost of living like I do, you will find that living in Japan is not that expensive at all. Japan seems to have this image of being really expensive, but it's really not. The main exception, of course, to this would be, say, living in Tokyo, of course, because that has the highest living costs in Japan. You're not going to get a lot for your money there, but outside of Tokyo, life in Japan really isn't that expensive. Even in Osaka City here, which is the second biggest city in Japan, our apartment is quite large here for Japan standards, and it's less than $1,000 a month for rent. Even better than it's actually usually cheaper to buy, as the mortgage repayments are usually less than what renting an equivalent house or apartment would be. In terms of other life costs, utilities here are a little on the expensive side, but food on the other hand is not very expensive at all, especially if you cook at home and buy local foods. Like local vegetables and, that kind of thing. If you eat out at stores or for dinner every day, then of course your food costs will be much higher than cooking at home. If you buy a lot of foreign foods as well, then they will be more expensive than eating local foods, as they have to be imported, of course. It's nice to have them every now and then, though, to have a bit of a taste of home. Like, if you're wanting that, Costco can be a great option for getting the foreign foods at reasonable prices. With all that being said, the best thing here is it's still actually possible to live comfortably with a family and with only one person working. In many other countries, both parents usually would need to work in order to afford rent or a mortgage. This can free up one parent to raise the children. Speaking of which, childcare is very cheap in Japan. It's actually just become free for certain ages, and for the other ones, it is based on your previous year's taxable income and set by the government, so it's very fair and affordable, especially if you're a low-income earner. Now, the downside to that is that it can be hard to get your kids in as places are limited, but that seems to be common around the world, so not much difference there. One thing I wanted to mention, that healthcare isn't very expensive here either. It's really good. You pay based on your previous year's salary, and then when you go to a clinic or hospital, the government insurance pays, say, 70%, and you pay the remaining balance, so it's about 30%. As it's controlled by the government, prices are also much cheaper. So, for example, I injured my foot and I went to the clinic. I didn't need an appointment, just went on the right day and had an X-ray, received some pills and some compression bandages, and I honestly paid less than $10 out of pocket. Couldn't believe it. And you can't complain about that. I mean, that's fantastic. So, what do you think about my list? Have you lived in Japan, or do you live in Japan? I'd love you to, leave a comment and see what your favorite things about life in Japan. Also, if you're thinking of moving to Japan or coming for a holiday and have some questions, please ask them below. I'd love to answer them for you. So, thank you very much for watching, and maybe I'll see you in the next one.